They said she was nothing, a servant, a shadow moving through corridors that reeked of power she could never possess. They said Omega wolves were born to serve, bred to submit, destined to disappear into the margins of history without leaving so much as a footprint. They were wrong. This is the story of how Sera, an Omega who spent 6 years pretending to be broken, became the strategist who toppled an empire. This is the story of how intelligence defeated brutality, how patience conquered power, and how one woman's grief transformed into a weapon sharper than any sword. This is the story of the Hidden War. The night air in Stonehaven Castle carried the scent of old stone and older secrets. 6 years had passed since they took Lyssa. 6 years since Sera watched her 2-year-old daughter torn from her arms and sold to the northern pack like livestock. 6 years since the last piece of her heart had been ripped away, leaving only rage and calculation in its wake. But rage, properly channeled, becomes strategy, and calculation, given enough time, becomes revolution. Sera moved through the darkness of the forbidden library with the confidence of someone who had walked this path 1,000 times before. The ancient floorboards knew her weight, knew exactly how much pressure they could bear before creaking. The shadows knew her shape, had grown accustomed to her presence during these midnight visits that no one suspected and no one saw. She knelt before the hidden panel in the eastern wall, the one the castle's builders had installed 3 centuries ago for reasons lost to time. Her fingers found the concealed latch by memory alone. The panel slid open with barely a whisper. Inside, documents, ledgers, evidence, years of meticulous collection, countless hours of stealing moments, copying records, memorizing conversations overheard while she scrubbed floors and served wine, and played the role of the invisible servant so perfectly that they forgot she had ears, had eyes, had a mind that processed everything they carelessly revealed. Tonight's prize sat before her. Encrypted ledgers from Beta Theron's private office, obtained 3 nights ago during a feast when every Beta in the castle had been too drunk to notice a servant slipping away from her duties. The cipher was complex, designed by someone who understood that secrets required protection. But Sera understood ciphers better than the man who created them. Old Aldrich had taught her that, among so many other things, before the winter cold had claimed him 3 years past. The librarian who had found her stealing books at 17, who instead of reporting her, had recognized hunger for knowledge that transcended rank and station. She could still hear his voice, raspy with age but sharp with wisdom. Knowledge is the only power they cannot take from you, child. Learn their laws better than they know them. Study their weaknesses while they study their wine. And when the moment comes, strike with precision, not passion. The moment was almost here. Sera's fingers traced the encrypted numbers, her mind translating automatically. Column 1, embezzlement from the military fund. Column 2, bribes received from merchants seeking favorable judgments. Column 3, payments made to silence witnesses. The numbers told a story. 50,000 gold pieces, stolen over 7 years. Enough to feed every Omega in the kingdom for a decade. Enough to provide medical care that might have saved dozens of lives. Enough to prove, beyond any shadow of doubt, that Beta Theron was not just corrupt, but treasonously, systematically, deliberately bleeding the kingdom dry. But numbers alone would not be enough. She needed names. She needed proof that connected these stolen funds to specific crimes, specific victims, specific moments that even the most loyal alpha could not dismiss as accounting errors or administrative confusion. She pulled out her transcription journal, the one she kept hidden in a cavity beneath the loose stone in her quarters. Her handwriting had evolved from the careful letters of someone newly literate to the abbreviated script of an intelligence operative. She recorded everything, dates, amounts, correlating evidence from other sources. And then she found it. A single line, encoded more heavily than the rest. She worked through the cipher twice to be certain, her pulse quickening with each decoded symbol. Northern Territory. Omega transfers. Compensation received. The words blurred. For just a moment, the iron control she maintained every waking hour threatened to crack. They had not just sold children, they had profited from it, systematically, for years. Somewhere in these numbers was Lyssa. Somewhere in this ledger of human trafficking was the transaction that had valued her daughter's life at however many pieces of gold Beta Theron had pocketed. Sera closed her eyes, breathed. force the emotion down into the deep place where she kept everything that would make her weak, make her careless, make her anything less than the perfect calculating instrument of justice she had forged herself to become. Grief later, strategy now. She copied the relevant entries with mechanical precision, each number exact, each notation perfect. Evidence required accuracy. Emotion was irrelevant to mathematics, and mathematics did not lie. The sound reached her before the footsteps did. A presence in the corridor outside the library. Heavy boots, military cadence, moving with purpose toward this supposedly restricted section of the castle. Sera's mind raced through calculations. Time to replace the documents. 15 seconds. Time to reseal the hidden panel. 8 seconds. Time to reach the servants' passage near the eastern window. 12 seconds. Total, 35 seconds. The footsteps were 20 seconds away, perhaps less. She moved. Documents back in their original order, panels sliding shut with practiced silence, her body already turning toward the window passage when the library door opened and she realized with cold certainty that she had miscalculated. She was not the only person hunting secrets in Stonehaven Castle tonight. The man who entered was not Beta Theron. For a fraction of a second, Sera felt relief, then recognition, then a spike of adrenaline that threatened to override her training. King Draven himself stood in the doorway, 6 feet 7 inches of alpha authority, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of 5 unified territories, eyes the color of winter ice scanning the library with the tactical assessment of someone who had commanded armies before his 30th year. He was alone, no guards, no attendants, just the king, moving through his own castle in the dead of night like a man who did not want his presence known. Sera's mind fragmented into a dozen simultaneous calculations. He had not seen her yet, her omega scent suppressed by the herbs she chewed religiously, her gray servant's dress blending into the shadows. She could slip into the window passage, could disappear, could preserve her cover and her mission. But something in the way he moved stopped her. Some intentionality in his path that had nothing to do with casual nighttime wandering and everything to do with purpose. He was heading toward Beta Theron's private office, the same office she had burgled 3 nights ago, the same office whose ledgers now sat decoded in her hidden journal, which meant either extraordinary coincidence or the impossible possibility that King Draven was conducting his own investigation into his Beta Council's corruption. The logical choice was retreat, preservation. But years of preparation had been building toward a moment, and Sera felt in her bones that this was it. This was the convergence she could not have planned, but could not afford to miss. She stepped into the light. Her movement was calculated, not aggressive, not threatening, but deliberate enough that he would know she was not simply a servant caught somewhere she should not be. She was someone choosing to reveal herself. His head turned, those ice-blue eyes locked onto her. She felt the weight of his alpha presence like a physical force, the instinctive omega submission that society had bred into her kind, trying to drag her to her knees. She remained standing, had learned years ago how to shield herself from alpha dominance, a trick she had found in one of Aldrich's forbidden texts. The technique was not perfect, but it was enough. They stared at each other across the library, king and servant, alpha and omega, 2 people who should have nothing in common except the castle they both inhabited. His nostrils flared slightly, scenting her, or trying to at least, through the herbal suppressants that masked her natural omega scent. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the sharp focus of someone encountering an unexpected variable in what should have been a carefully controlled operation. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the royal command she had heard in the Great Hall. Just quiet assessment, one strategist to another. "You are not cleaning staff." It was not a question. Sera had to make a choice in the next 3 seconds that would determine whether she lived through the night or disappeared into an unmarked grave like so many Omegas before her. She chose truth, partial truth at least, the kind that opened doors. "No, Your Majesty, I am not." She watched his hand, ready to move if he reached for the sword at his hip. But he remained still, studying her with an intensity that suggested he was recalibrating his own assumptions. "What are you doing in the restricted library at midnight?" "Seeking the same thing you are, I suspect. Evidence of corruption in your Beta Council." The silence that followed her words was absolute. She had just committed treason or revealed herself as an ally, and for 3 heartbeats she genuinely did not know which it would be. Then King Draven did something she had not anticipated. He smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the cold satisfaction of a commander who had just watched an enemy accidentally reveal their battle plan. "Prove it," he said. "Tell me one thing you have discovered that I do not know." Sera's mind raced. Giving him information was risk, but holding back now would mark her as either liar or coward. Beta Theron has embezzled 50,000 gold pieces over 7 years. He maintains encrypted ledgers in his private office, southeast desk, third drawer, false bottom. The cipher is a modified Aldrich sequence, rotating key based on lunar calendar. He has been trafficking Omega children to the Northern Territory for profit. 32 documented cases over 6 years. She paused, then added the detail that would either condemn or save her, including my daughter. 2 years old when they sold her. Her name was Lissa. The king's expression shifted. Not with pity, she noted, with some part of her mind that remained clinically observational even now, with recognition. The look of someone who understood that personal loss could become either weakness or weapon, depending on how it was wielded. He moved closer. Not threatening, but closing distance enough that she could see the scars along his jawline, evidence of battles that had marked him long before he took the throne. "I have been investigating the Beta Council for 2 years, he said quietly, but I lacked proof substantial enough to move without triggering civil war. Half the alphas in this kingdom are related to or allied with my advisors. The moment I act without absolute evidence, I risk tearing the territories apart." Sera felt something shift in the air between them. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of recognition. Two people engaged in the same war from different directions. "The Blood Moon Festival begins in 2 days," she said. "Sacred law requires you to hear any petition for justice presented during that time. Article 17 of the original Pack Codes. Any wolf, regardless of rank, may challenge corruption if they can prove their case before the assembled pack." His eyes widened fractionally. "You have studied the ancient laws. Better than most of your betas, I would wager." A longer pause now. She could see him thinking, calculating, weighing risks and opportunities with the same tactical mind that had unified 5 warring territories under one crown. "Why reveal yourself to me now? You could have remained hidden, built your case in secret. Because you were heading to the same office I burgled 3 nights ago. Because we are hunting the same corruption. And because," she allowed herself the smallest hint of challenge in her voice, "I suspect you need me as much as I need you." "Explain." "You have authority, but lack evidence. I have evidence, but lack authority. Together we have both. You make me your official investigator under the Blood Moon protocols. Give me legal protection to present my findings. I give you the proof you need to move against the betas without it appearing as political purge." She watched his face carefully. This was the moment. Either he would see the strategic value, or he would see only an Omega overstepping every boundary society had ever drawn. "You are asking me to make an Omega a Beta Council liaison, to give you official rank and protection. The conservatives will call it madness. They will call it many things, but they cannot call it illegal. Not during the Blood Moon Festival. Not when sacred law explicitly permits it." Draven moved to the window, looking out over the castle grounds where, in 2 days, hundreds of wolves would gather for the festival that came only once per year. The 7-day period when ancient law superseded modern politics, when any wolf could petition for justice without fear of immediate retribution. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into decision. "I will agree to your proposal, on one condition. Name it, that you understand what you are proposing. The moment I make you official, you become a target. Every beta with something to hide will want you dead. I can offer protection, but I cannot guarantee your safety every moment of every day." Sera thought of Lissa, of the mass graves behind the castle where Omegas were buried without names or markers, of years spent being invisible, being nothing, being the shadow that everyone ignored. "Your Majesty, I have been a target my entire life. The only difference is that now I will have the authority to strike back." Something flickered across his face. Respect, perhaps, or the recognition of someone who understood exactly what it meant to choose battle over safety. "Very well. Tomorrow morning I will announce your appointment as Special Investigator for the Blood Moon Festival. You will have access to all records, all locations, and the protection of my personal guard." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a weight that suggested this was the real condition. "But know this, if you are lying to me, if this is some elaborate scheme, I will show you no mercy. Omega or not, traitor or not, I will end you myself." Sera met his gaze without flinching. "If I am lying, Your Majesty, I will deserve whatever end you deliver. But I am not lying. And before the blood moon wanes, you will have every piece of evidence you need to burn the corruption from this kingdom." He studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Not in dominance, but in the gesture warriors used when forging an alliance between equals. She took it. His grip was strong but not crushing. A test, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sera." "Just Sera?" "Just Sera. Omegas do not get family names, Your Majesty. We are not considered worthy of legacy." His jaw tightened. That, among many other things, is going to change. He released her hand and moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Your scent. It is suppressed, but I can still sense something unusual. You are not typical Omega." Sera had wondered when he would mention this. The truth was complicated, but she owed him honesty in this if they were to work together. "After Lissa died, something changed in me. My wolf, which had always been weak and suppressed as Omega wolves are trained to be, began to emerge. Stronger, different. I do not fully understand it myself." Draven's expression shifted into something she could not quite read. When he spoke, his voice carried a strange intensity. "There are legends, old stories about Omega wolves who undergo transformation through extreme trauma. They called them rising wolves, Omegas who evolve into something beyond the traditional hierarchy. You think that is what I am? I think," he said carefully, "that you are far more dangerous than anyone in this castle suspects, including perhaps yourself." He left then, his footsteps receding down the corridor with the same military precision with which he had arrived. Sera remained in the library, her heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and terror. She had just forged an alliance with the king himself, had just transformed herself from invisible servant to official investigator with royal protection. She had also just painted the largest target imaginable on her back. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the hidden war would become visible. Tomorrow, she would stand before the entire pack and declare open warfare against corruption that had festered for generations. But tonight, for just a few more hours, she was still a shadow, still unseen, still the weapon no one knew existed. She returned to the hidden panel, added one more entry to her journal. Date, time, details of the encounter. Everything documented, everything recorded. Because intelligence work was not about dramatic gestures. It was about meticulous preparation, careful documentation, and the patient accumulation of evidence that could not be dismissed or denied. When she finally made her way back to the Omega quarters, moving through the servant passages with practiced silence, Mira was waiting. Her friend sat on the narrow cot they shared, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide with worry. "Where have you been? Do you know what time it is? If Morvain catches you missing after curfew again, she will have you whipped." Sera sat beside her, taking Mira's hands in her own. For years, Mira had been her only friend, the only other Omega who knew that Sera was more than she appeared. Not the full extent of her plans, but enough to know that midnight disappearances were not simple restlessness. "Mira, I need you to listen carefully. Tomorrow morning, things are going to change, dramatically, and I need you to be ready." Mira's eyes widened further. "What did you do?" "What I have been planning to do. I am going to bring them down. All of them. Every beta who has profited from our suffering. Every corrupt official who has stolen from this kingdom. Every person responsible for what happened to Lissa and the dozens of other children they sold like livestock." "Sera," Mira's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "They will kill you. They will try. But I am not alone anymore. I have an ally, a powerful one." "Who?" "The king himself." Mira stared at her like she had announced her intention to fly to the moon. "The king? King Draven? Sera, have you lost your mind? He is Alpha. They are all the same. They use us and discard us, and the only difference between them is how much they pretend to care while doing it. He has been investigating the corruption for 2 years. He needs proof. I have proof. We formed an alliance. Tomorrow he announces my appointment as Blood Moon investigator." Mira pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. "This is insane. This is suicide. Sera, please, I know you are brilliant and brave and everything they told us we could never be, but this is too much. You cannot fight the entire Beta Council. You cannot survive this." Sera rose, placing her hands on Mira's shoulders. Her friend was shaking. "I can. I will. Because the alternative is spending the rest of my life scrubbing their floors while they sell more children. The alternative is dying invisible and unmarked like everyone else they have destroyed. And I cannot will not accept that future. She softened her voice. But I need you safe. Tomorrow, when the announcement comes, stay quiet. Do not defend me. Do not draw attention to yourself. Let them focus their rage on me. Can you do that? Mira's eyes filled with tears. You are asking me to watch you walk into the fire alone. I am asking you to survive, so that when this is over, when we have won, you can help me rebuild what we are going to burn down. They held each other in the darkness of the Omega quarters, two women who had survived when so many others had not, who had maintained hope when everything they knew said hope was foolish. Tell me you believe we can win, Mira whispered. Sera pulled back, meeting her friend's eyes. I know we can win, because I have spent years preparing for this, because I know their secrets better than they do, because I have memorized every law they use to oppress us, and I'm going to turn those same laws into weapons, and because for the first time in my life, I have power they cannot take away. What power is that? Truth, evidence, and the sacred laws of the blood moon that even the most corrupt beta cannot violate without losing all legitimacy. She helped Mira back to the cot, waited until her friend's breathing steadied into something approaching sleep. Then Sera lay in the darkness, reviewing every step of the plan that would unfold tomorrow. King Draven would make the announcement at morning assembly. The betas would be shocked, outraged, but unable to protest during the sacred period. She would have 7 days to present her evidence, 7 days of legal protection that even assassins would hesitate to violate. But protection did not mean safety. It meant only that killing her would have consequences. Whether those consequences would be enough to stop her enemies, she honestly did not know. Sleep came eventually, but it was the light sleep of a soldier before battle. Every sound registered, every shift in the castle's nighttime rhythms noted and catalogued. She dreamed of Lissa. Not the nightmares that had haunted her, but something different. Her daughter, older, the age she would have been now if she had lived. 8 years old, laughing, running through fields that did not exist in any territory Sera knew. In the dream, Lissa turned back, her small face serious. Are you winning, Mama? Sera tried to answer, but the dream shifted, dissolved, became the cold reality of dawn light filtering through the high windows of the Omega quarters. Around her, other Omegas were stirring. Morning chores began before sunrise, floors to scrub, meals to prepare, the endless invisible labor that kept the castle functioning while those who benefited from it pretended the workers did not exist. Sera rose, dressed in her usual gray servant's dress. For a few more hours, she was still nobody, still nothing, still the shadow they had trained her to be. But when the sun cleared the eastern wall and morning assembly was called, that shadow would step into the light, would speak with authority granted by the king himself, would begin the process of tearing down the structures that had oppressed her kind for generations. The Omega quarters bell rang, harsh and insistent. Time to begin the day, time to serve breakfast to the betas who would, in less than 2 hours, discover that one of their servants had transformed into their judge. Sera moved through this morning routine with automatic precision, carrying trays, pouring wine, keeping eyes downcast while her mind ran through every possible contingency. The great hall filled with the usual morning chaos, betas arguing over territory disputes, alphas discussing military deployments, servants moving between tables with the invisibility that came from being too familiar to notice. Beta Theron sat at the high table, looking smug and comfortable. He had no idea that his encrypted ledgers had been decoded, his crimes catalogued, his entire empire of corruption about to collapse. Sera served him wine. He did not look at her, did not see her. She was furniture to him, useful furniture perhaps, but no more worthy of notice than the table he ate from. Let him think that, let them all think that, for just a little longer. The royal trumpet sounded. King Draven entered the great hall, and every wolf rose in respect. He moved to the high table with the same military bearing Sera had observed last night, but this morning his expression carried a weight that suggested something significant was about to occur. He remained standing after everyone else had sat. That alone was unusual. Morning assemblies were typically brief, administrative affairs. Pack members of Stonehaven, Draven's voice carried to every corner of the hall. Today marks the beginning of the Blood Moon Festival, 7 days when our ancient laws supersede modern custom, when any wolf may petition for justice regardless of rank or station. The assembled wolves murmured acknowledgement. This was standard opening ritual. This year, I am invoking Article 17 of the original pack codes. I am appointing a special investigator with full authority to examine any claims of corruption, misconduct, or violation of pack law." Beta Theron leaned forward, suddenly interested. "An investigator could be useful, Your Majesty. With your permission, I would like to nominate Beta Cassian for the position. He has extensive experience in legal matters." The king's expression did not change. "I have already made my selection. Someone who has demonstrated exceptional knowledge of pack law, remarkable investigative skills, and the courage to pursue justice, even when doing so places them at personal risk." He gestured, and Sera felt every eye in the hall turn to follow his hand. "Sera, step forward." The great hall exploded into chaos. Sera walked through the erupting storm of shocked voices, keeping her eyes fixed on the king. Every step was measured, every movement projected confidence she barely felt. Behind her, she heard Mira's sharp intake of breath, heard Beta Garrick's outraged roar, heard a dozen voices shouting protests, questions, demands for explanation. She reached the high table and dropped to one knee, the gesture of respect she had practiced until it was perfect. Not submission. Respect. Draven's voice cut through the chaos. "This Omega has uncovered evidence of serious corruption within our administration. During the Blood Moon Festival, she will present her findings. Any wolf who interferes with her investigation will answer to me personally." Beta Theron was on his feet, face purple with rage. "Your Majesty, this is madness. An Omega cannot hold investigative authority. It violates every tradition, every proper hierarchy of our people." "It violates no law," Draven said coldly. "I have reviewed Article 17 extensively. It permits the Alpha King to appoint any wolf as investigator during the Blood Moon period. Any wolf. The law makes no distinction by rank." "This is political insanity," another Beta shouted. "The conservative territories will see this as weakness, as pandering to progressive elements that would destroy pack structure. Let them. I am more concerned with justice than politics, and if our pack structure cannot survive honest investigation, then perhaps it deserves to be destroyed." The silence that followed was absolute. No one had expected the king to defend his decision so aggressively. "Sera," Draven's voice softened fractionally. "Rise. You have 7 days to present your evidence. My personal guard will ensure your safety. Use your authority wisely." Sera stood, turned to face the assembly. Hundreds of faces stared back. Shock, rage, confusion, and on some of the Omega faces in the servants' corners, something that might have been hope. She spoke clearly, projecting her voice the way Aldrich had taught her when they practiced speeches in the empty library. "I will conduct this investigation with integrity and precision. I will follow evidence wherever it leads, and I will ensure that every wolf in this kingdom, regardless of rank, receives equal justice under our ancient laws." It was a careful speech, threatening no one explicitly, promising only fairness, but every corrupt Beta in the hall heard the underlying message. "Your crimes are known. Your time is ending. Justice is coming." Beta Theron sat down slowly, his expression calculating. Sera knew that look. He was already planning how to eliminate this new threat. Let him plan. She had been preparing for years, and now she had the one thing she had never possessed before: authority, legal protection, and the backing of the most powerful alpha in 5 territories. The hidden war had just become very, very visible, and Sera intended to win it. The war room had never seen an Omega before. 3 centuries of military planning, strategic conferences, and tactical decisions made by alphas and betas in a space designed to project power and exclude weakness. The maps on the walls depicted territories conquered, battles won, enemies crushed beneath the weight of superior strategy and overwhelming force. Sera walked into that room, with her head high and her evidence carefully organized in the leather satchel King Draven had provided. The 12 wolves already seated around the massive oak table represented the military and political elite of the kingdom. Generals who had commanded thousands, advisors who had negotiated treaties, veterans whose scars told stories of survival that most wolves would never understand. And now they were expected to take orders from a servant. The silence was hostile. Sera felt it like a physical weight, the collective disapproval of men who believed she had no right to breathe the same air, let alone participate in decisions that would shape the kingdom's future. But she had survived worse than disapproval. She had survived invisibility, and invisibility, properly leveraged, had taught her to see what others missed. She took the empty seat to the king's right, the seat traditionally reserved for the chief military advisor, the seat Beta Theron had occupied for the past decade. Theron's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. King Draven had made his position clear. Any interference with the investigation would be treated as treason. "Gentlemen," Draven's voice cut through the tension, "Special Investigator Sera has uncovered evidence of systematic corruption within our administration. She will present her initial findings. You will listen with the same attention you would give any strategic briefing. Questions will be permitted after her presentation." He gestured to Sera. "The floor is yours." Sera stood, moving to the tactical map that dominated the eastern wall. She had memorized every territory, every supply route, every strategic choke point during her years of study. Now that knowledge would serve a different kind of warfare. "For the past years, I have been documenting financial irregularities, legal violations, and systematic abuse of power within the Beta Council. What I initially believed was isolated corruption has proven to be something far more extensive." She placed her first document on the table, a summary sheet, carefully prepared to deliver maximum impact with minimum exposition. "Beta Theron has embezzled 50,000 gold pieces from the military and civilian funds over 7 years. The money was diverted through a complex network of shell accounts, false vendors, and fabricated expenses. I have traced every transaction." Theron stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I demand to see this alleged evidence." "You will see it," Sera said calmly. "All of it, along with the rest of the pack, during the public hearing in 3 days. That is how Blood Moon investigations function. Evidence is presented publicly to prevent selective suppression." She moved to the next point before Theron could respond. "Beta Garrick has been stealing provisions from military supply lines and selling them to neighboring territories at significant profit. Over 4 years, approximately 30,000 gold pieces worth of food, weapons, and medical supplies have been diverted. This has resulted in supply shortages that directly contributed to the deaths of soldiers during the Northern Campaign." General Thane, the grizzled veteran who commanded the castle's defenses, leaned forward. His face was weathered by decades of service, his eyes sharp despite his age. "How many soldiers?" Sera met his gaze without flinching. "Based on after-action reports and medical records, I estimate 43 deaths can be attributed directly to supply shortages that should not have existed." The room's atmosphere shifted. Stealing money was one thing. Causing soldiers to die was another entirely. These were military men. They understood the sacred trust between commanders and those they led. "Beta Cassian," she continued, "has been accepting bribes to fix legal judgments. I have documented 27 cases over 5 years where verdicts were predetermined based on payment received. This includes 3 murder cases where wealthy defendants were acquitted despite overwhelming evidence." And finally, she placed the last document on the table, the one she had been saving, the one that would transform this from corruption investigation to existential threat. Headmistress Morvain, working in coordination with Beta Theron, has been trafficking Omega children to other territories. 32 documented cases. The children were sold under false pretenses of adoption or labor exchange. In reality, they were being purchased by wealthy wolves in other territories for purposes that I will detail in the public hearing. The silence that followed was different now, not hostile, horrified. Prince Kieran, younger brother to the king and commander of the Northern Legions, spoke for the first time. His voice was carefully controlled, but Sera heard the rage beneath. "You are saying that members of this kingdom's leadership have been engaged in child trafficking for years, and no one noticed." "They noticed," Sera said quietly. "They were complicit, or they were threatened into silence, or they were killed before they could report what they knew." She pulled out another document. This one contained names, Omega servants who had died under suspicious circumstances over the past decade, falls downstairs, kitchen accidents, sudden illnesses that struck only those who had witnessed transactions or overheard conversations they should not have. I estimate that 12 Omegas were murdered to maintain this conspiracy. Their deaths were ruled accidental or natural. No investigations were conducted. No one cared enough to look closely at dead servants. "How did you survive?" Colonel Thane's question was tactical, not accusatory. "You were investigating them. How did they not kill you?" "Because I was invisible. I played my role perfectly. The broken Omega, too damaged by grief to be a threat, too useful as a servant to discard. They never suspected that the woman scrubbing their floors was also copying their ledgers. King Draven had been silent during her presentation, but now he spoke. You mentioned that you initially believed this was isolated corruption. What changed your assessment? Sera had been waiting for this question. She pulled out the document she had discovered only last week, the one that had transformed her understanding of what they were truly facing. 3 weeks ago, I intercepted a coded message from Beta Theron to a contact in the Eastern Territories. It took me 8 days to break the cipher. The message referenced someone called the High Chancellor and mentioned coordinated operations across multiple territories. She placed the decoded message on the table. I began investigating this High Chancellor. What I found suggests that the corruption in Stonehaven is not unique. It is part of a larger network, an organization that has been manipulating pack politics across at least 15 territories for decades, possibly centuries. The implications hung in the air like smoke. If Sera was correct, they were not dealing with a few corrupt officials. They were dealing with a shadow government that controlled half the known territories. This is speculation, Theron said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. You have no proof of this alleged organization. Not yet, Sera admitted, but I will. Because someone coordinates the child trafficking, someone provides the infrastructure for moving stolen goods between territories. Someone ensures that corrupt officials in different kingdoms all use the same methods, the same ciphers, the same tactics. She turned to face the assembled commanders directly. That kind of coordination does not happen by accident. It requires organization, resources, time, and a belief that they are untouchable. What do you propose? Draven asked. Sera had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing her recommendation. It was audacious. It was dangerous. And it was the only path she could see that did not end in their complete destruction. We use the Blood Moon Festival to expose the local corruption publicly. We present irrefutable evidence. We let pack law take its course. But we do it in a way that sends a message to this larger organization. What message? Kieran asked. That we know they exist, that we are not afraid, and that we are coming for them next. You want to start a war, Theron said. His face had gone pale. You have no idea what you are proposing. These people, this organization, they have power beyond anything you can imagine. They will crush us. Perhaps, Sera said, or perhaps they are weaker than they appear. Perhaps their power relies on secrecy, on the belief that they cannot be challenged. And perhaps exposing one cell of their network will encourage others to do the same. She looked at each face around the table. You are military commanders. You understand asymmetric warfare. We cannot defeat them with armies. We do not have the numbers, but we can defeat them with information. We can turn their own secrecy against them. Every territory where wolves learn the truth is a territory where their power fractures. It was Thane who broke the contemplative silence. The old colonel stood, moving to examine the documents she had laid out. He read slowly, thoroughly, his scarred fingers tracing the evidence with the care of someone who understood that details mattered. Finally, he looked up. This evidence is solid, better than most military intelligence I have seen. Whoever taught you investigative technique knew what they were doing. A librarian named Aldrich, Sera said. He believed knowledge should not be restricted by rank. He taught me to read, to analyze, to question everything. Thane nodded slowly. Then he taught you well. He turned to the king. Your Majesty, I recommend we proceed with the public hearing as planned. The evidence warrants action, and if there is indeed a larger conspiracy, better we face it now, while we still have the element of surprise. One by one, the other commanders voiced their agreement. Even those who clearly harbored reservations about taking orders from an Omega could not dispute the quality of her evidence or the logic of her strategic assessment. Only Theron remained silent, his expression calculating. Sera knew that look. He was already planning his next move. The meeting adjourned with assignments distributed. Thane would secure the evidence, ensuring it could not be stolen or destroyed before the public hearing. Kieran would quietly alert trusted commanders in the Northern Territories, building a network of allies who could move quickly if the situation escalated. Other officers received tasks suited to their expertise. Sera gathered her documents, preparing to return to the temporary quarters Draven had assigned her. No longer the Omega Servants' dormitory, now a private room in the secured wing, guarded by soldiers loyal to the king. As the others filed out, Draven gestured for her to remain. When they were alone, he moved to the window overlooking the castle grounds. You did well in there. Thane's respect is not easily earned. If he supports you, others will follow. Sera joined him at the window. But not all of them. No, not all. Draven's voice carried a weight of experience. There will be attempts on your life, probably multiple, some overt, some subtle. Are you prepared for that? I have been a target my entire life, Your Majesty. The only difference now is that I have the authority to fight back. He turned to face her, and something in his expression had shifted. Less king, more man. Have you eaten today? The question was so unexpected that Sera actually had to think about it. I do not remember. Come. There is a private dining room adjacent to my quarters. We will eat while we discuss the next phase of your investigation. It was not a request, but it also was not a command. Something in between. An invitation from someone who understood that strategic partnerships required more than formal briefings. The private dining room was smaller than Sera expected. A simple table, 2 chairs, a window that caught the afternoon light. Servants brought food, then disappeared with the discretion of those trained to be invisible. Sera found herself studying the king across the table. In the war room, he had been every inch the alpha commander. Here, in this quieter space, she could see the weight he carried. The lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. The scars that disappeared beneath his collar. Evidence of battles that had marked him long before he took the throne. You said earlier that you have been investigating the council for 2 years, she said. What made you suspicious initially? My father. Draven's voice carried old pain. He died 7 years ago. Officially it was illness, a fever that the healers could not cure. But you do not believe that. I believe he was poisoned. He had been planning to reform Omega Protections, to crack down on corruption. 2 weeks before his death, he told me he had discovered something significant, something that would change everything. He died before he could tell me what it was. Sera felt a chill. Did you investigate? I tried. I was 28 years old, newly crowned, surrounded by advisors who had served my father and who assured me his death was natural. I had no proof, no evidence, just instinct that something was wrong. He met her eyes. So I learned to wait, to watch, to gather evidence slowly enough that no one suspected. For 2 years I have been building a case, but I could never move openly, not without risking civil war. Until I gave you the excuse you needed. Until you gave me the partner I needed. He leaned back, studying her with that same tactical assessment she had seen in the library. You are not what I expected when I heard rumors of an Omega who could read. What did you expect? Someone broken. Someone who had learned just enough to be dangerous to themselves. Instead, I found a strategist who thinks 3 moves ahead and has the courage to bet everything on a plan that most trained commanders would call suicide. Is that admiration or concern? Both. Draven's smile was brief but genuine. You remind me of someone, a general I served under before I took the throne. He believed that the best strategies were the ones the enemy never saw coming because they violated every expectation. What happened to him? He died in battle, killed by an enemy who had learned to expect the unexpected. His voice carried warning. Brilliance is not enough. You also need to survive long enough to see your plans come to fruition. They ate in companionable silence for a time. Sera found herself relaxing fractionally, the constant vigilance that had sustained her easing just enough to allow hunger to register. The food was simple, but well prepared. Far better than the scraps that typically made their way to the Omega quarters. Tell me about Lissa, Draven said quietly. If you are willing. Sera's hand stilled on her cup. No one had asked about her daughter with genuine interest. The pain was still sharp, would always be sharp, but she found she wanted to answer. She was perfect. 2 years old when they took her. She had my hair, her father's eyes. She laughed at everything. Flowers, birds, shadows on the wall. The world delighted her. Her father? A beta who decided an Omega was entertaining for a night. When I told him I was pregnant, he denied responsibility. When Lissa was born, he made sure we were both marked as his property so no other wolf would interfere. And when Morvain decided to sell her, he signed the papers without hesitation. Draven's expression hardened. His name. Sera met his eyes. It does not matter. He is dead, killed in a tavern brawl 3 years ago. The universe has a sense of justice, even if we do not always see it. But you kept going. After losing her, after losing everything, you chose to fight instead of surrender. What else was there? Grief without purpose is just drowning. Grief with purpose becomes fuel. She set down her cup. I made a choice. I could let her death destroy me, or I could let it forge me into something that could prevent other mothers from suffering the same loss. Every document I copied, every cipher I broke, every night I spent studying laws that were designed to keep me powerless, I did it for her. For all the children they have taken and will take if no one stops them." The king was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When this is over, when we have exposed the corruption and reformed the laws, what will you do?" Sera had not allowed herself to think that far ahead. Survival beyond that point had seemed like an unaffordable luxury. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have spent so long preparing for war that I have forgotten how to imagine peace. Then we will learn together, because if we survive this, if we actually succeed in tearing down the structures that have oppressed your kind for generations, neither of us will know how to function in the world we create." There was something in his voice, not quite promise, not quite invitation, something more complex, the acknowledgement that they were both walking into fire and might not walk out. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Thane entered, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. One of the Omega servants, Mira, has been attacked." Sera was on her feet before conscious thought caught up to movement. "Where is she?" "Medical wing. She is alive but injured. The healer is with her now." Sera was already moving toward the door when Draven's voice stopped her. "Wait, this could be a trap. They attack your friend to draw you into an ambush." "Then they succeed." Sera's voice was flat. "Because I will not leave Mira unprotected. I am not suggesting you abandon her. I am suggesting you bring guards." He gestured to Thane. "Colonel, assemble a security detail. No one enters or leaves the medical wing without thorough verification." They moved through the castle corridors at a near run, Sera forcing herself to match the military pace rather than sprint ahead. Guards fell in around them, a protective formation that would have seemed paranoid a week ago, but now felt barely adequate. The medical wing smelled of herbs and old pain. Sera found Mira on a bed near the back, her face bruised, her arm splinted. But she was conscious, alive. "Sera," Mira's voice was weak but carried relief. "I am all right, just bruises." "What happened?" "Beta Theron's son. He cornered me in the storage corridor, demanded to know where you were, what your routine was, how to reach you." Mira managed a weak smile. "I told him to go to hell." Apparently he did not appreciate that. "Did he hurt anyone else?" "He tried, but Elena intervened." Sera turned to find Elena standing in the corner. The older Omega looked like she had been through her own fight. Knuckles split, jaw swelling, but her eyes were fierce. "The bastard thought he could intimidate information out of us," Elena said. "I reminded him that some Omegas know how to fight back." "Where is he now?" Draven's voice carried cold authority. "Your guards have him in custody, Your Majesty." Thane appeared in the doorway. "He is demanding to be released, claiming diplomatic immunity as the son of a Beta Council member. He claimed no such thing when he was beating a defenseless servant." Draven moved to Mira's bedside, and his presence seemed to fill the room. "You have my word. He will face justice for this." Sera took Mira's hand, feeling the tremor that spoke of shock wearing off and fear setting in. "You were brave, foolishly brave. Someone had to be." Mira squeezed back weakly. "You cannot fight them all alone, Sera, even with the king's protection." "She will not have to." Elena stepped forward. "There are 47 of us in the Omega Network. We have been gathering intelligence, yes, but we can do more. We can fight." "You are not soldiers," Sera started to say, but Elena cut her off. "Neither were you until you chose to be. We have been watching you prepare for this war. You think we are going to sit back and let you walk into fire alone?" Sera looked at Mira, at Elena, at the determination in their faces. These were women who had survived when survival seemed impossible, who had maintained dignity when everything tried to strip it away. "If you are serious about this," she said carefully, "then we do it properly. Training, organization, no heroic gestures that get you killed for nothing." Elena's smile was sharp. "We have someone who can train us, someone with military experience." "Who?" She stepped aside, and another Omega entered the medical wing. Older than the others, perhaps 45, with the bearing of someone who had once worn uniform and learned hard lessons about survival. A woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe braid, scars on her forearms that spoke of combat, and eyes that assessed the room with professional efficiency. "My name is Sergeant Kira, former military, dishonorably discharged when they discovered I was Omega. I have been working in the castle kitchens for 3 years, waiting for an opportunity like this." Sera felt something shift in her understanding of the situation. This was not just her war anymore. It had never been just hers. She had simply been the first to organize it. Draven was watching the exchange with an expression Sera could not quite read. Finally, he spoke. If you are going to train Omega fighters, you will need equipment. Space. Official sanction so that no one can arrest you for weapons possession. He turned to Thane. Colonel, I am establishing an auxiliary defense force. Omega volunteers trained in self-defense and tactical awareness. Sergeant Kira will command, reporting directly to you. See that they have everything they need. Thane's weathered face creased into something that might have been approval. Yes, Your Majesty. It will be done. Over the next 3 days, the castle transformed. What had been hidden preparation became visible action. Sergeant Kira established a training ground in an unused courtyard. 47 Omega volunteers began learning basic combat, weapons handling, tactical movement. They were not soldiers, not yet, but they were learning. Sera divided her time between finalizing evidence for the public hearing and watching the training sessions. She saw Omegas who had been beaten down their entire lives, discovering that they were capable of strength. Saw women who had never held a weapon learn to defend themselves with competence born of desperation and determination. Elena proved to be a natural leader, her years of suppressed rage channeling into focused aggression that made even some of the regular soldiers take notice. Mira recovered quickly, insisted on joining the training despite her injuries. Others followed their example. And through it all, Sera felt the weight of what she had started. This was no longer just about exposing corruption. It was about fundamentally changing what it meant to be Omega in this kingdom. The night before the public hearing, Sera could not sleep. She stood on the balcony of her quarters, looking out over the castle grounds, where tomorrow hundreds of wolves would gather to hear evidence that would shatter their understanding of how their kingdom functioned. Footsteps behind her. She turned to find Draven approaching, 2 cups of wine in hand. He offered her one. Nervous, he asked? Terrified. But Sera took the wine. Tomorrow morning, everything changes. Either we succeed and begin the process of reform, or we fail and they kill everyone who supported us. There is a third option. We succeed and they kill us anyway because reform threatens too many powerful interests. That is not comforting, Your Majesty. It was not meant to be comforting. It was meant to be honest. He joined her at the railing. I have been thinking about what you said, about grief becoming fuel. I think I have been doing the same thing since my father died, using his murder to drive me forward. But I never asked myself what comes after. After we win? After we survive. There is a difference. They stood in silence, 2 people who had both learned that survival required sacrifice and that justice demanded more than most were willing to pay. Sera. Draven's voice carried a different quality now. Less king, more man. If we do survive tomorrow's hearing, if we actually pull off this impossible gambit, I want you to know something. She waited. I did not choose you as investigator just because you had evidence. I chose you because I recognized something in you. Someone who understood that real change requires more than good intentions. It requires the willingness to burn everything down and rebuild from ashes. He set down his wine cup. I have been alone in this fight for 2 years. Having a partner, someone who thinks as strategically as I do, who is willing to take the same risks, it changes everything. Sera felt something shift between them. Not attraction. Not yet. Something deeper. The recognition that comes when 2 people discover they are fighting the same war from different trenches. Your Majesty, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. I am not doing this for you. I am doing this for every Omega who has been told they are worthless, for every child who was sold, for every woman who died invisible and unmarked. I know. That is what makes you effective. You are not seeking my approval or anyone else's. You are seeking justice, and that cannot be compromised or negotiated away. He turned to face her fully. But I also need you to understand something. This alliance we have formed, it is based on strategy and mutual benefit, but it is becoming something more, and I do not know if that makes us stronger or more vulnerable. What do you mean? I mean, his voice dropped lower, that I find myself caring whether you survive this, not just because you are valuable to the mission, but because you are you, and that is dangerous for both of us. Sera's breath caught. She had been so focused on strategy, on survival, on the mission, that she had not allowed herself to examine the way her awareness sharpened whenever Draven entered a room, the way his respect felt like validation she had never known she craved. "This cannot happen," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know. Alpha King and Omega Revolutionary. It would be seen as exploitation, as me using my power to coerce you. Even though it would not be. Even though it would not be." He stepped back, creating distance. "Which is why it cannot happen. Not now. Not while the power dynamic is so unequal. And after? If we somehow survive and reform the laws, then we revisit this conversation, as equals." The moment hung between them, potential and impossibility balanced on a knife edge. Then Sera nodded, accepting the logic even as some part of her mourned what could not be. "Tomorrow, then. We focus on surviving tomorrow morning's hearing." "Tomorrow," he agreed. They parted, each returning to their quarters to face sleepless hours before dawn. Sera lay in darkness, her mind running through the presentation she would give. Every word had been chosen for maximum impact, every piece of evidence organized to build toward inescapable conclusions. She thought of Lissa, of Mira and Elena, and all the Omegas who had chosen to fight. Of Draven, carrying the weight of his father's murder and the hope that justice was still possible. Tomorrow morning she would stand before the assembled pack and accuse the Beta Council of crimes that demanded their removal from power. She would present evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away. She would invoke ancient laws that even the most conservative wolves could not deny. And then, one way or another, the war would begin in earnest. The first light of dawn crept through her window. Sera rose, dressed in the formal attire Draven had provided. Deep blue, the color of royal protection. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Years ago, she had been broken. A mother whose child had been stolen, a servant whose life held no value, an Omega whose voice counted for nothing. Now she was Special Investigator Sera. She carried evidence that would topple governments. She had the backing of the king himself. She commanded respect from military commanders who had spent their lives believing Omegas were beneath notice. The transformation was not magic. It was not destiny. It was the result of relentless work, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to accept that her daughter's death would be meaningless. A knock at her door. Thane's voice. "Special Investigator, the assembly is gathering for the public hearing. Are you ready?" Sera picked up the leather satchel containing years of evidence. She thought of every Omega who had died invisible, every child who had been sold, every corrupt official who had believed themselves untouchable. "Ready," she called back, and she walked out to face her destiny. The Great Hall had never held so many wolves, every pack member of fighting age, every elder who could still walk, every Omega who had been granted permission to witness what might be the most significant moment in the kingdom's history. They filled the space until the very air seemed compressed by the weight of anticipation and tension. Sera stood in the center of the hall, a single figure in royal blue, surrounded by hundreds of eyes that carried judgment, curiosity, hostility, hope. The formal presentation area had been arranged like a military tribunal. King Draven presided from the high seat, flanked by neutral observers from 3 neighboring territories who would verify that Blood Moon protocols were being followed properly. The 6 accused Betas sat in a row to her left, each flanked by guards. Beta Theron's expression was carefully neutral, but Sera could see the calculation behind his eyes. He still believed he could talk his way out of this, still thought that rank and connections would shield him from consequences. He was wrong. "Members of the pack," Draven's voice carried to every corner of the hall. "We are gathered under the sacred laws of the Blood Moon Festival. Special Investigator Sera has invoked Article 17 to present evidence of corruption within our administration. Under ancient law, you will hear her testimony in full. Questions will be permitted only after her complete presentation. Any wolf who interrupts this proceeding will be removed and barred from the final judgment." He gestured to Sera. "The floor is yours, Investigator." Sera stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "For 6 years, I have been documenting crimes committed by members of the Beta Council. What began as a personal quest for justice has revealed systematic corruption that reaches far beyond this kingdom." She held up the first document. "Beta Theron has embezzled 50,000 gold pieces from military and civilian funds over 7 years. I will now present the evidence." What followed was not dramatic revelation. It was methodical destruction. Sera walked the assembled pack through ledgers, transaction records, coded messages. She showed them shell companies that existed only on paper, false vendors whose addresses led to empty buildings, fabricated expenses that bore Theron's signature but corresponded to no actual purchases. The numbers told their own story: cold, precise, irrefutable. Several pack members shifted uncomfortably as the magnitude of the theft became clear. 50,000 gold pieces, enough to have prevented the food shortages that had plagued the Omega quarters for years, enough to have properly equipped the soldiers who died during the Northern Campaign. But Sera was not finished. Beta Garrick, she continued, turning to the next accused, has been stealing military provisions and selling them to neighboring territories. Over 4 years, approximately 30,000 gold pieces worth of supplies were diverted. She produced military inventory records, annotated with her own careful analysis. She showed discrepancies between what was ordered, what was recorded as received, and what actually reached the troops. She presented testimony from Omega servants who had witnessed crates being loaded onto unauthorized wagons in the dead of night. And then she showed the casualty reports from the Northern Campaign. 43 soldiers dead, not from enemy action, but from malnutrition, from infected wounds that could not be properly treated because medical supplies had been stolen, from cold because winter gear had been sold for profit. Sera saw General Thane's jaw tighten, saw other military commanders exchanging dark looks. Stealing money was corruption. Getting soldiers killed was unforgivable. The hall had gone completely silent now. What had begun as spectacle was transforming into something else. Witnesses to the dismantling of power structures they had assumed were immutable. Beta Cassian, Sera's voice remained steady, has been accepting bribes to fix legal judgments. 27 documented cases over 5 years. She presented court records, financial transactions that lined up too perfectly with verdict dates to be coincidental. She showed cases where overwhelming evidence had been ignored, where guilty defendants had walked free while their victims received no justice. One case in particular drew gasps from the assembly: a wealthy alpha accused of murdering an Omega servant. The evidence had been clear: multiple witnesses, physical proof. But Cassian had ruled it accidental death, and the Alpha had paid him 500 gold pieces the following week. The murdered Omega's name had been Kira, mother of 3, 28 years old. Sera let that information settle. Let the assembled wolves understand that corruption was not just about stolen money, it was about stolen lives. And finally, she turned to the evidence she had been saving, the evidence that would transform this from corruption trial into something far more significant. Headmistress Morvain, working in coordination with Beta Theron, has been trafficking Omega children to other territories. 32 documented cases over 6 years. The hall erupted, shouts of disbelief, of outrage, of denial. Draven's voice cut through the chaos. "Silence! The investigator will present her evidence." Sera held up the ledger she had decoded, the one that listed children by name, age, and sale price. She read the entries aloud, each name, each amount, each destination. When she reached the 17th entry, her voice faltered for just a moment. Lissa, age 2, Northern Territory, 800 gold pieces. The silence that followed was absolute, because everyone in the hall now understood that this was not abstract justice. This was personal. The investigator presenting evidence had skin in this game, had lost something irreplaceable to the corruption she was exposing. Sera continued reading, all 32 names, all 32 prices, all 32 destinations where children had been sold like livestock. When she finished, she set down the ledger and looked directly at Morvain. The headmistress had gone pale, her earlier defiance crumbling as she realized the scope of evidence arrayed against her. "These are the documented cases," Sera said quietly. "The ones I could prove beyond doubt. But I believe there are more, many more, and I intend to find every single one." She turned to address the full assembly. This corruption did not happen in isolation. It required infrastructure, coordination, resources that extend beyond this kingdom. She pulled out the decoded message, the one referencing the High Chancellor. 3 weeks ago, I intercepted this communication. It suggests that the corruption in Stonehaven is part of a larger network, an organization that has been manipulating pack politics across multiple territories for decades, possibly centuries. Beta Theron found his voice. "This is speculation, conspiracy theory from a desperate Omega trying to justify her accusations." "Is it?" Sera met his eyes. "Then explain the cipher." Explain why your coded messages use the exact same encryption method as communications intercepted in the Eastern Territories, the Southern Reaches, and the Western Provinces. Explain why corrupt officials across 12 different kingdoms all funnel stolen money through the same network of shell companies. She held up more documents, financial records that showed money flowing between territories in patterns that made no sense unless coordinated by a central authority. Someone is orchestrating this. Someone provides the infrastructure, the protection, the methods, and I will find out who. The neutral observers were conferring quietly among themselves. One of them, an elder from the northern packs, stood. Investigator Sera, these are serious accusations. Do you have concrete proof of this alleged organization's existence? Not yet, Sera admitted, but I have patterns, evidence of coordination, and I have this. She produced her final piece of evidence, a partial message she had intercepted just 2 days ago. The encryption had been too complex to fully decode, but she had managed to extract fragments. The message warned of a problem in Stonehaven. It referenced an Omega who had become dangerous, and it requested authorization to eliminate the threat. That Omega is me, and the authorization was granted yesterday. She looked directly at the assembled pack, which means someone in this hall, someone who knew about this investigation, sent word to the larger organization. Someone is their agent, their eyes and ears in Stonehaven. The paranoia that rippled through the assembly was palpable. Wolves looking at each other with new suspicion, wondering who could be trusted. Draven stood. We will address the question of infiltration later. For now, we must determine the guilt or innocence of the accused. He gestured to the neutral observers. You have heard the evidence. What is your assessment? The 3 elders conferred briefly. Then the Northern Pack representative spoke. The evidence regarding embezzlement, supply theft, and judicial corruption is overwhelming and credible. We find the accused guilty on those charges. He paused before continuing. The evidence regarding child trafficking is also substantial. Multiple corroborating documents, financial records that align with the accusations, and testimony that appears credible. His expression hardened. We find the accused guilty on all charges. The hall erupted again. This time Draven let the reaction play out. Let the pack members process what they had just witnessed. Justice after generations of corruption going unchallenged. When silence finally returned, Draven spoke. Under pack law, the crimes of embezzlement, supply theft, resulting in military deaths, judicial corruption, and child trafficking carry severe penalties. The accused will be stripped of rank and position. Their assets will be seized to provide restitution to victims and their families. He paused, and his voice went cold. Additionally, for the crime of child trafficking, which resulted in the deaths of multiple Omega children, the accused will be stripped of their wolves. The gasps that greeted this pronouncement were shocked. To strip a wolf of their inner beast was the harshest sentence short of execution. It left the victim alive but hollow, human in all but name. Your Majesty, please. Theron finally broke. Mercy, I was following orders. The High Chancellor demanded these actions. Silence fell again. Theron had just confirmed what Sera had suspected. The larger organization was real, and its reach extended into the highest levels of pack leadership. Draven's expression did not change. Then you will provide us with every detail you know about this High Chancellor and his organization. Names, locations, methods, everything. Theron nodded frantically. Yes, I will tell you everything. Just please do not take my wolf. The ritual of wolf stripping would come later. For now, Draven turned to address another matter. Under Article 17, a successful petitioner may claim the positions of those found guilty. Special Investigator Sera, do you wish to claim a seat on the Beta Council? Sera had prepared for this moment. She stepped forward, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I claim the seat of Beta Theron as Chief Advisor. I claim the seat of Beta Cassian as Chief Justice. And I claim the authority to reform Omega protections throughout this kingdom. The conservative faction erupted. An Omega on the Beta Council, an Omega in positions of authority. It violated every tradition, every assumption about how pack hierarchy was supposed to function. But Draven's voice overrode the protests. The law is clear. She has proven her case. She has earned these positions through merit and courage. Any wolf who challenges her claim may do so through formal process. A figure stood in the assembly. Alpha Valdis, a massive warrior from the Eastern Territories who had been visiting for the Blood Moon Festival. His reputation preceded him. Undefeated in combat, conservative to his core, believer in the old ways. "I challenge her claim," Valdis declared. "Trial by combat. If she wants those seats, let her prove she is worthy to hold them." Sera had expected this, had prepared for it. The laws of challenge were clear. Any wolf could contest a new council appointment through combat within 7 days of the appointment. She met Valdis's eyes across the hall. "I accept your challenge." Draven stood abruptly. "This is unnecessary. Her evidence speaks for itself." But Sera shook her head. "No, Your Majesty. He has the right to challenge under pack law, and I have the right to defend my claim." She turned to Valdis. "What are your terms?" "Human form combat, ceremonial weapons. First blood determines the victor." "Agreed. When?" "Dawn tomorrow, the training grounds." Sera nodded. "Then I will see you at dawn, Alpha Valdis." The assembly was dismissed with instructions to gather the following morning for the challenge. As wolves filed out, talking in excited or worried voices depending on their sympathies, Sera found herself surrounded by her allies. Mira grabbed her arm. "Are you insane? Valdis has been fighting for 30 years. He has killed opponents in the challenge circle." "Then I will be careful not to die," Sera said calmly. Elena pushed forward. "We can prepare you. Kira knows his fighting style. She saw him compete in the Eastern Territories 5 years ago." "Good. Then we have tonight to train." But it was Draven who pulled her aside as the others made plans. His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the concern beneath. "You do not have to do this. I can refuse the challenge on procedural grounds." "You could. But then every traditionalist in the kingdom will claim I hid behind your authority, that I am weak and only survived through your protection. Better weak and alive than strong and dead." Sera met his eyes. "I need to prove, to myself as much as anyone else, that I belong in this position, that I earned it through my own strength, not just through evidence and legal maneuvering." His jaw tightened. "Then we train. I have 16 hours to teach you how to survive a man who has been killing since before you were born." They worked through the night. The private training ground behind the castle became a laboratory of violence and precision. Draven demonstrated Valdis's likely tactics. The man favored overwhelming force, using his size and strength to intimidate and crush opponents quickly. "Do not try to match his power. You will lose." Draven corrected her stance for the 10th time. "Use his momentum against him, make him overcommit, then strike where he is vulnerable." Sera practiced the same sequence of movements until her muscles remembered them without conscious thought. Evade, redirect, counter. Evade, redirect, counter. It became rhythm, became instinct. Sergeant Kira joined them, offering tactical analysis based on her observation of Valdis years ago. "He gets angry when opponents do not fight the way he expects. Use that. Make him frustrated. Angry fighters make mistakes." The sky was lightening toward dawn when Draven finally called a halt. Sera's arms ached, her legs trembled with exhaustion, but her mind was clear. "Remember," he said quietly, "this is not about defeating him through superior strength. It is about being smart enough to find the opening and brave enough to take it." Sera nodded. She was neither the strongest nor the fastest, but she was patient, and patience, properly applied, could defeat almost anything. The training grounds filled as the sun cleared the horizon. It seemed the entire castle had turned out to watch. Sera saw omegas clustering together, their faces showing fear and hope in equal measure, saw military commanders watching with tactical interest, saw conservative alphas clearly hoping Valdis would put this upstart omega back in her place. Valdis was already in the circle, stripped to the waist, his massive frame showing the scars of a lifetime of combat. He held a ceremonial sword with the casual confidence of someone who had wielded such weapons since childhood. Sera entered the circle wearing light training leathers. Her sword was lighter than standard, balanced for speed rather than power. Draven had chosen it specifically for her, recognizing that she would need every advantage that skill could provide. The adjudicator, a neutral elder from the Western province, stepped forward. "This is a formal challenge under pack law. Combat will continue until first blood is drawn. The victor claims the contested council seats. The defeated must yield their claim and leave the territory." He looked at both combatants. "Are you ready?" "Ready," Valdis said confidently. "Ready?" Sera echoed. "Begin." Valdis attacked immediately, his sword sweeping in a powerful arc designed to end the fight in seconds. Sera dove aside, rolled, came up in a defensive stance. The crowd murmured. They had expected her to try to block, to match force with force. "Stand and fight," Valdis growled. "Stop running." Sera did not respond. She watched his movements, catalogued his patterns. He favored his right side slightly. His left knee showed old injury in the way he pivoted. Small details, but details mattered. He attacked again, a series of heavy strikes that drove her backward across the circle. To the watching crowd, it looked like she was losing, being overwhelmed by superior strength and experience. But Sera was counting, measuring the intervals between his attacks, learning the rhythm of his assault. On his 7th strike, she did not retreat. She stepped inside his guard, exactly as Draven had taught her, blade flashing upward toward his sword arm. Valdis twisted, faster than she expected for a man his size. Her blade scored his shoulder instead of his arm. First blood, but barely, a scratch rather than a substantial wound. The adjudicator hesitated. Technically, first blood had been drawn, but was it enough? Valdis made the decision for him. He dropped his sword and grabbed Sera with bare hands, his massive strength overwhelming her defense. He lifted her bodily and threw her across the circle. Sera hit the ground hard, the impact driving air from her lungs. Her sword skittered away. The crowd roared, some in triumph, others in dismay. Valdis retrieved his sword and stalked toward her. "Stay down, Omega. I will make this quick. A clean death for a brave attempt." Sera's vision swam, but through the pain, through the ringing in her ears, she heard a voice, not external, internal. Her wolf, which had been growing stronger over the years, which had been awakening through grief and determination. "Get up!" She forced herself to her feet, swaying but upright. Her sword was too far away. She would have to face him unarmed. Valdis raised his blade, the crowd held its breath, and Sera did something no one expected. She laughed. "What is funny, Omega?" Valdis paused, confused. "You." Sera's voice carried across the suddenly quiet circle. "You came here thinking you would crush a weak Omega. Show everyone that the old ways are superior. That strength is all that matters." She steadied herself, pain transforming into focus. "But I am not weak. I never was. You just told yourself I was because it made you feel powerful." Enough words. Valdis charged, abandoning technique in favor of pure aggression. Exactly what Kira had said he would do when frustrated. Sera waited until the last possible moment. Then she dropped low, blade held forgotten in his right hand, and swept his injured left leg. He crashed down, his own momentum betraying him. Before he could recover, Sera had his sword arm pinned, her body weight leveraged against the joint in a hold Kira had taught her. "Yield," she said quietly. "Never!" He struggled, but the hold was biomechanically perfect. The harder he fought, the more pressure it put on his shoulder joint. "Then I break your arm and you never hold a sword again. Your choice." The circle was absolutely silent. Everyone watching understood what was happening. The Omega was not just winning. She was giving the proud alpha warrior a choice: dignity or destruction. Valdis went still. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man confronting reality he had refused to see. "I yield." Sera released him immediately, stepping back. The adjudicator rushed forward. "The Omega has drawn first blood and secured verbal yield. The challenge goes to Special Investigator Sera." The reaction was mixed. Omega supporters erupted in celebration. Conservatives stood in shocked silence. Military observers nodded with professional appreciation for the tactical skill they had just witnessed. But Sera was not looking at the crowd. She was looking at Valdis, who had risen to his feet, rubbing his shoulder. "You fought with honor," she said quietly, "and you gave me the respect of a genuine challenge. Thank you." Something shifted in Valdis's expression. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I have been telling myself that Omegas are weak, because it justified the hierarchy, because it made my privilege seem earned rather than inherited." His voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But you just taught me something I should have learned decades ago. Strength comes in many forms, and honor demands I acknowledge it regardless of rank." He dropped to one knee, the gesture of a warrior acknowledging a superior opponent. "You have my respect, Beta Sera, and my support for your reforms." The symbolism was powerful. A conservative alpha publicly endorsing Omega equality. Sera knew that not all traditionalists would follow Valdis's example, but some would. And that was how change happened. Not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice. She helped Valdis to his feet. "Then let us work together to build something better than what we inherited." The crowd began to disperse, talking in excited voices about what they had just witnessed. Sera made her way to where her allies waited. Mira threw her arms around her. "You did it! You actually did it!" "We did it," Sera corrected. "All of us." Elena was grinning fiercely. That hold at the end, perfect execution. Kira would be proud. Where is Kira? Sera looked around. Training the next group. Elena's grin widened. 30 more Omega volunteers showed up this morning after watching you win. Apparently, seeing an Omega defeat an Alpha warrior in fair combat makes people reconsider their assumptions. But it was Draven who pulled her aside as the others celebrated. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the emotion beneath. That was the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed, and I have led cavalry charges against fortified positions. Sera smiled despite the exhaustion and pain. But I survived, barely. If Valdis had not chosen honor at the end, if he had fought dirty as he was entitled to do under challenge law, this would have ended very differently. She sobered. I know, but he did choose honor. That tells me something important. What? That even wolves raised in the old ways can change when confronted with evidence that contradicts their assumptions. If Valdis can evolve, others can too. Draven was quiet for a moment. Then, we need to talk about what comes next. Theron has started talking. The information he is providing about this High Chancellor organization is both valuable and terrifying. How terrifying? He claims they control 15 of 20 territories, that they have been orchestrating pack politics for over 200 years, and that they do not tolerate threats to their power structure. Meaning we just declared war on an enemy we barely understand. An enemy with resources and reach far beyond anything we have faced before. He gestured toward this castle. Come, we have much to discuss, and decisions to make that will determine whether we survive the next month. The war room had expanded. No longer just military commanders and political advisors. Now it included Sergeant Kira, Elena, several Omega intelligence operatives, and representatives from the growing number of wolves who supported reform. Draven stood at the head of the table, a map of the 20 territories spread before him. Theron's information has been verified where possible. The High Chancellor is real. The organization he commands is called the Alpha Covenant, and they have been controlling pack politics across multiple territories for at least 2 centuries. He marked locations on the map. They have confirmed cells in these 15 territories. Each cell consists of high-ranking officials who coordinate corruption, suppress rising wolves, and maintain the hierarchy that keeps Omegas powerless. Why? Elena asked. What do they gain from keeping us down? Control, Sera said. She had been thinking about this since discovering the larger conspiracy. If Omegas can rise to positions of power based on merit, the entire pack hierarchy becomes fluid. Alphas have to compete. Betas have to prove their worth. The system becomes meritocratic rather than aristocratic. Exactly, Draven confirmed. The Covenant maintains power by ensuring that rank at birth determines rank for life. Any wolf who threatens that system, Omega or otherwise, is eliminated. He looked around the table, which means they will come for us. For Sera specifically, since she represents the greatest threat to their ideology, but also for anyone who supports her reforms. Let them come, Kira said flatly. We will be ready. Will we? Draven's voice was not challenging, just realistic. They have 15 territories worth of resources. We have 1, and that one is still divided with conservatives who oppose reform. Prince Kirin, who had returned from the northern territories for the challenge, leaned forward. We need allies. Other territories where reform-minded wolves are willing to stand against the Covenant. I may be able to help with that, Valdis said. All eyes turned to him. His presence in the war room had raised eyebrows, but Draven had accepted his offer to share intelligence from the Eastern Territories. There are 3 territories where I know the current leadership is corrupt and unpopular. If we could expose their crimes the way Sera exposed Stonehaven's corruption, we might inspire similar uprisings. It is a risk, Colonel Thane said. We spread our resources thin, trying to support multiple revolutions simultaneously. But the alternative is waiting for the Covenant to organize their response and crush us with overwhelming force. Sera studied the map. We need to move fast, strike multiple cells before they can coordinate a unified defense. You are proposing simultaneous operations across multiple territories? Draven looked at her. That is ambitious to the point of recklessness. It is also our best chance. Information warfare, remember? We cannot beat them with armies, but we can beat them by exposing the truth faster than they can suppress it. The strategic debate continued for hours. Plans were proposed, debated, refined. Omega operatives would be deployed to the 3 target territories. They would gather evidence using the same methods Sera had pioneered. When enough proof was accumulated, they would use blood moon festivals in those territories to present their cases. It was audacious, it was dangerous, and it was their only viable strategy. As the meeting adjourned, Sera found herself exhausted but energized. They had a plan, they had allies, they had momentum. She returned to her quarters to find a package waiting. Inside, a formal document bearing the royal seal. Her official appointment to the Beta Council, signed by Draven and witnessed by the neutral observers. Beta Sera, Chief Advisor and Chief Justice. 6 years ago, she had been nobody. A servant scrubbing floors while her heart bled for a daughter she would never see again. Now she was one of the most powerful wolves in the kingdom, with authority to reshape laws that had oppressed her kind for generations. A knock at her door. She opened it to find Draven, holding 2 cups of wine. "I thought you might appreciate a moment to process everything that has happened today." She let him in. They stood by the window looking out over the castle grounds where tomorrow would begin the real work of reform. Theron provided one more piece of information, Draven said quietly, about Lissa. Sera's hand tightened on her cup. "What about her?" "She died of fever 3 years ago, as you were told. But before she died, she was adopted by a family in the Northern Territory, a beta couple who could not have children of their own. They treated her well. She was loved." Sera felt tears she had not allowed herself in years. It did not undo the crime, did not bring her daughter back, but knowing that Lissa's last year had been spent with people who cared for her, rather than in the brutal conditions of the Omega pens, eased something in her chest that had been clenched tight for too long. "Thank you for telling me." They stood in silence for a time. Then Draven spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality. "When I made the blood oath, I swore never to use my power to control you. I want you to know that still stands. Everything that has happened, everything you have achieved, it is yours. Not given by me, earned by you." Sera turned to face him. "I know, and I need you to understand something. What I said the other night about this alliance becoming something more, I was not rejecting the possibility. I was acknowledging that the timing was impossible. And now? Now I am Beta Sera. I have authority of my own. The power imbalance is not eliminated, but it is significantly reduced." She set down her wine cup. "So I am choosing to explore this, not as Omega to Alpha King, but as one partner to another in this revolution we are building." Draven's expression shifted, relief and want and careful control all visible in his eyes. "Are you certain?" "About very little. But I am certain that you see me as an equal, that you respect my intelligence and courage, and that what we have built together is worth more than following outdated rules about who can love whom." He set down his own cup, moved closer. "This will cause problems. The conservatives will claim I corrupted you, used my position to coerce you. Let them claim what they want. We know the truth, and that is enough." Their first kiss was tentative, testing. But it deepened into something more. Not passion born of desperation, but connection built on mutual respect and shared purpose. When they finally pulled apart, Sera smiled. "That was worth waiting for." "It was," Draven agreed. "But we should probably keep this private for a while. Let the reforms take hold before we give the conservatives another target." "Agreed." She touched his face. "Besides, we have a war to win. Romance is secondary to survival." "Then let us win the war," he said, "and build a world where who you love matters less than whether you love with honor." The next 3 months transformed Stonehaven and rippled outward. Sera's reforms were implemented with systematic precision. Mandatory education for Omegas, healthcare equality, legal protections against abuse, pathways to advancement based on merit. The Omega Auxiliary Force grew to 300 trained fighters. Sergeant Kira proved to be an exceptional commander, instilling discipline while maintaining the revolutionary spirit that motivated her troops. And across 3 other territories, Omega operatives gathered evidence, copied ledgers, documented crimes, prepared cases that would be presented during their respective Blood Moon festivals. The Covenant did not sit idle. There were assassination attempts, diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions threatened against territories that supported reform, but each threat was met and countered. Valdis became an unexpected ally, using his reputation to sway other conservative alphas. If even traditionalists like him could see the value in meritocratic reform, others might follow. The first test came in the Western Province. An Omega investigator named Tomas presented evidence against their Beta Council. The trial was contentious, but the evidence was solid. The council fell, and reforms were implemented. One territory became two, two became three. The revolution was spreading. But Sera knew the real confrontation was still coming. The High Chancellor would not allow this to continue unchecked. Sooner or later, the Covenant would respond with force rather than subterfuge. The blow came on a cold morning 4 months after her initial presentation. A messenger arrived from the Eastern Territories. The High Chancellor himself was marching with an army of 35,000 soldiers. Destination, Stonehaven. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. King Draven called an emergency war council. The gathered commanders studied maps, ran calculations, debated strategies. By every traditional military metric, they were doomed. 2,000 regular troops plus 300 Omega auxiliaries against 35,000 seasoned warriors. But Sera had spent 6 years learning that traditional metrics did not tell the whole story. "We cannot win a conventional battle," she said, "so we do not fight one." "What do you propose?" Thane asked. "We fort up in Stonehaven, use the castle defenses to their maximum advantage, and while they besiege us, we continue spreading truth to their soldiers." "You want to convert their army while they are trying to kill us?" Kieran sounded skeptical. "I want to give their soldiers a reason to question why they are fighting. Every day they sit outside our walls is another day we can communicate with them, show them evidence, make them wonder if they are on the right side." "It is a long shot," Draven said, "but it might be our only shot." The preparations were intense. Food stores secured for a 4-month siege. Defensive positions reinforced. Escape routes prepared in case evacuation became necessary. And Sera prepared information packets. Truth bombs to be launched over the walls every night. Documents showing the High Chancellor's crimes. Lists of Omegas murdered. Evidence of the corruption that had enriched Covenant leaders while common soldiers went unpaid. The enemy army arrived like a storm. 35,000 strong, led by a general named Ravius, who had never lost a battle. His ultimatum was simple: send out the Omega and the weak king. The rest would be spared. Draven's response was delivered from the castle walls: "Come and take us." The siege began with probing attacks, Ravius testing defenses, looking for weaknesses. Thane coordinated the response with calm efficiency. The walls held. On the third night, Sera began her campaign. Jonas had rigged a catapult to launch sealed containers over the walls. Inside each container, carefully prepared information about the Covenant's crimes. Soldiers in the enemy camp found them. Some dismissed the information as propaganda. Others read with growing unease. By the 7th day, the first deserters appeared. Small numbers, but significant. Wolves who read the evidence and could not justify fighting for people who had lied to them. Ravius responded with executions. 12 deserters hanged publicly to maintain discipline. But the action backfired. More soldiers questioned what they were fighting for if their leaders had to murder them to maintain loyalty. 2 weeks into the siege, everything changed. A figure approached the castle gates under white flag. Captain Marcus, a decorated officer from the enemy army, requesting audience with King Draven. "It could be a trick," Thane warned. "Or it could be opportunity," Sera countered. Marcus was brought to the war room under heavy guard. He carried documents, evidence from within the enemy command structure. "I have been reading your information packets." His voice was steady. "They match reports I have seen, orders I was told to ignore. My sister was Omega. She died in childbirth because military healers refused to treat her. I was told it was unavoidable." He set his documents on the table. "But I found the medical logs. The healers were ordered not to treat Omega patients. Direct orders from the Covenant to maintain population control and suppress potential rising wolves." His expression hardened. "I have 500 soldiers who will follow me. We want to defect, but we need assurance that you are different, that you are not just replacing one tyranny with another." Over the next week, Marcus observed, he saw Omega soldiers training alongside Alphas, watched war councils where Sera argued with Kieran as equals, witnessed Draven taking advice from wolves of all ranks. Slowly, his skepticism transformed into conviction. On the 8th day, he made his choice. "I pledge my 500 to your cause, and I will help you win this war." The addition of Marcus's force changed the tactical situation, but they were still badly outnumbered. The real shift came when Jonas managed to infiltrate the siege camp and plant evidence throughout. By the 4th week, Ravius's army was fracturing. Desertions increased to hundreds per day. Officers questioned orders. The unified force began to splinter along moral lines. And then the High Chancellor himself arrived. 7 ancient Alphas, representatives of the Covenant's leadership, come to restore order and crush the rebellion personally. Led by High Chancellor Augustus. 70 years old, white-haired, radiating power and absolute certainty in the righteousness of his cause. He demanded a parley. Draven agreed. They met in the neutral ground between castle and siege lines. Augustus, flanked by his 6 fellow council members. Draven, with Sera at his side as equal partner. "This farce ends now," Augustus declared. "You will surrender the Omega Revolutionary and submit to Covenant authority, or we will level this castle and everyone in it." Sera stepped forward. "I am the Omega Revolutionary you want, and I am not going anywhere." She held up documents. Evidence of 200 years of systematic genocide. 10,000 Omegas murdered to maintain Covenant power. Financial records showing stolen wealth. "Your soldiers deserve to know what they are fighting for, who they are dying for." Augustus's face twisted with rage. "You know nothing of what we have built, the order we have maintained. Without us, the territories would descend into chaos." "Without you," Sera said quietly, "wolves would be free to rise based on merit instead of birth. That is what you really fear. Not chaos, loss of control, loss of..." The parley devolved into accusations and threats, but every soldier watching understood what they were witnessing: the Covenant defending privilege, the reformers defending justice. That night, the largest wave of desertions yet. 2,000 soldiers left Ravius's army, many joining Stonehaven's defenders. Ravius himself came to the gates the next morning, alone, unarmed, requesting to speak with Sera. She met him with guards present but gave him the courtesy of a hearing. "I have spent 30 years serving the Covenant." His voice was hollow. "I executed their orders without question, including orders to kill Omega children they claimed were dangerous." He showed her a list, 217 names, children he had personally killed or ordered killed over 15 years. "I told myself I was maintaining order, protecting civilization. But your evidence shows I was just a murderer serving other murderers." Sera studied the broken general, saw genuine remorse in his eyes, and made a choice. "You cannot undo what you have done, but you can stop more deaths. Help us end this. Tell your army the truth." Ravius addressed his remaining forces that afternoon, told them everything, the lies, the murders, the corruption, and gave them a choice. Stand with the Covenant and continue serving genocidal tyrants, or stand with the revolution and build something better. By nightfall, Ravius's army had dissolved. 20,000 soldiers chose to stand down. 8,000 joined Stonehaven's defenders. The remaining 7,000 retreated with the High Chancellor, their numbers too depleted to continue the siege. Augustus screamed threats and promises of vengeance as he withdrew, but he withdrew nonetheless. The siege was broken. The war was not over. The Covenant still controlled other territories, still had resources and reach, but they had lost their aura of invincibility, and more importantly, they had lost the narrative. Over the next 3 months, 5 more territories rose up. Omega investigators presented evidence. Corrupt councils fell. Reforms spread. The revolution Sera had started in Stonehaven was becoming a continental movement. And while the Covenant still existed, still threatened, their power was fracturing, territory by territory, truth by truth. 6 months after her initial presentation, Sera stood in a transformed council chamber. Representatives from 12 territories, elected rather than appointed. 40% Omega, 35% Beta, 25% Alpha. The first session of the Continental Coalition was called to order, and Sera, now recognized as Chief Justice of the Coalition, presented the first piece of legislation. Universal rights for all wolves. Education, health care, legal protection, advancement based on merit rather than birth rank. The vote was unanimous. That night, Sera and Draven stood on the balcony of their shared quarters. Their relationship was public now, accepted if not universally approved, King and Chief Justice, partners in revolution and in life. "We did it," Draven said quietly. "Not complete victory, not yet, but we changed the world." "We started to change it," Sera corrected. "The real work is just beginning, building the systems that will outlast us, training the next generation, making sure this revolution becomes permanent reform." She looked up at the stars. "I used to think justice was about revenge, making them pay for what they took from me. But it is larger than that. It is about ensuring no one else loses what I lost, that no other child is sold, no other mother suffers as I suffered." Draven pulled her close. "Lissa would be proud of what you built in her name." "I hope so." Sera's voice was soft. "I hope wherever she is, she knows that her death was not meaningless, that it sparked a revolution that freed thousands." They stood in silence. Two people who had met as hunter and hunter, become allies, then partners, then something more. Who had risked everything and somehow survived to see their impossible vision begin to take shape. In the distance, lights from the city below, Omega children walking to schools that would have been unthinkable a year ago, families living in peace that law now protected, a future that was being built one day, one choice, one brave act at a time. The war was not over. The Covenant still existed in 7 territories, still plotted their return to power. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more nights when survival seemed impossible. But tonight, Sera allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in 6 years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of the powerless dreaming of rescue, but the solid hope of someone who had seized power for herself and was using it to build something worth defending. They had started as shadows, invisible servants in a system designed to erase them. They had become weapons, intelligence operatives striking from darkness. And now they were architects, building a new world on the ruins of the old, where strength was earned, not inherited, where justice was universal, not selective, where every wolf, regardless of the rank they were born into, had the opportunity to rise as high as their courage and competence could take them. It was not the world that had existed, but it was the world they were creating, together, one choice at a time. And that, Sera thought as she looked out over the transformed kingdom, was justice worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary, but better yet, worth living for, worth building a future for. The Omega who had been nothing had become everything she needed to be, not through magic or destiny, but through intelligence, perseverance, and the stubborn refusal to accept that the world could not change. She had proven them all wrong. The ones who said she was worthless, the ones who claimed Omegas could never lead, the ones who believed the hierarchy was natural and immutable. She had torn down their certainty and built something better in its place. And she was just getting started. The end.